What is landscape architecture and what can you expect when you come to NUS to study landscape architecture, specifically in the Bachelor of Landscape Architecture program here at the Department of Architecture? So, my name is Dr. Irvin Lin. I am the Associate Program Director for the BLA program, and I'll be running through with you a stack of slides to let you better understand what the BLA program is in Singapore, as well as what to expect when you do join us in NUS. So here are some of the contents. I will go through basically how landscape architecture is taught in NUS, some of the admission requirements, what are the future prospects for our students and our graduates, some frequently asked questions that we are often asked in our interviews and kind of outreach sessions, as well as some ways in which you can find out more about the program. So let's start with this. What is landscape architecture? That's something that a lot of people, including myself, had problems with at the start when we were trying to figure out what to study in university. To put it in a very short nutshell, landscape architecture is the study and practice. Is the study and practice of designing the outdoor environment that surrounds us. So this quite often includes parks and gardens, like the example that you see on screen, which is Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park, as well as all the other vegetated areas kind of surrounding in between the built landscape here in Singapore. But that's not to say that's the only thing we do. We actually are capable of achieving much more than just parks and gardens, even though that's what most people think we do. We look at the planning of towns, we look at cities, we look at informing infrastructure. So instead of just having a canal, why can't you green it such that you have more than just the conveyance of water as a service? You have recreational services, you have ecosystem services as well. We also inform or find ways to solve issues of urbanization and urban sprawl, and all of these are using landscape architectural techniques, and the scale of which, as you will see, is actually much bigger than just simply just parks and gardens. Now, how we do this in NUS is that we have a core emphasis of inculcating the next generation of landscape architects to be stewards of shaping a livable, sustainable, and resilient environment. So we do this through three main themes, the first of which is socio-ecological sensitivities. So what this means is that we not only look at how people use the landscape, sociology-wise, from a social aspect, but also from an ecological aspect, how the landscape can create a better environment for us. We ground all this in scientific knowledge as much as possible using ecology, sociology, geology, you name it. And all of this also is then encapsulated in the latest technology and techniques that we have available in our profession. So the program is a 4-year program depending on where you come from. If you come from a typical GCE A-level, IB diploma, etc., you come in as a freshman in year 1. If you do have a diploma that is recognizable by our program, specifically a landscape architectural diploma, you are able to slot in at year 2 and skip the whole first year. Now, after the 4th year, if you graduate with a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture, after which you can either spend 3 years in practice and get your accreditation by the Singapore Institute of Landscape Architects, or SILA, or you can choose to do an MLA, a Master's. If you choose to do the Masters and you're coming from the BLA program, you can skip the first year, go directly into the second year, do a single year, get your Masters, and then you need 2 years of practice in order to get accreditation. So you can see, even if you do a Bachelor's or a Master's, either way you can get to accreditation. Just depends on how much you want to invest in the education process here in NUS. So this is a brief layout of the courses that we have. I won't go through them in detail because it's just too much for most people to understand. Just note that there are 2 main sections. The top section, for example, are the design studios. So design studios are more intensive modules that we take that look at most of the time at an actual design. Right? You have to have a site and then you actually design for it. These tend to be 8 modular credits instead of 4. And the second row that you see at the bottom is the lecture series. So the lecture series are meant to teach you very, very specific topics, for example, planting design or landscape construction. And you're then supposed to use this knowledge that you learn during the lectures in your design studios, right? I won't go through this in detail, but I will show you in slides so that you kind of understand it a little bit more. Now, if you didn't understand the table, it doesn't matter too much. We summarize it in a few simpler words, right? So we connect nature, place, and people. That's what we do here in NUS, and that's what we inculcate in our students as well. So to do that, we teach you a couple of things. So in terms of nature, we look at planting design and horticulture. So we are not botanists, we are not horticulturists, so we're not plant experts, if you want to call it that. But you need to know enough about plant material. You need to know what kind of soil they need, what kind of light requirements they need, what are the species that are available for landscape architects to use in their palette, right? We also look at ecology, or the basics of ecology. What you see there is something like soil ecology. A lot of people don't understand, but there are different types of soil. There are silty soils, sandy soils, clay soils, and different types of soil has different properties, and different plants require different kinds of soils as well. So even as something as mundane as soil requires a lot of depth, a lot of understanding in order for you to create successful landscape architectural projects. Now, in terms of place, we firstly want you to understand how to read certain places, and then secondly, we want you to be able to create these places that you design. So to do this, we introduce you to GIS, Geographical Information Systems, to put it simply, mapping. So the reason why we are so interested in mapping is because landscape architects, like I mentioned, deal with typically larger scales, right? So we're not looking at the scale of a single household garden, although that can be a project. We're looking at something much bigger. And usually when we go at something much bigger, we require information at a larger scale for us to understand that particular place. So for example, the map that you see on top are different kinds of maps of Singapore. Again, we're using this to understand the particular site that we're designing for. Now, the image on the bottom right are some of the tools that we use both to record, understand, or to actually eventually design for the particular project that we're looking at, right? So you see a lot of measurement tools, including temperature tools, distance tools, drones to measure things from above, etc., right? So the reason behind this is so that we can show you what the tools are available for you to then convert from your design into something that is potentially built in future. We are not green activists, although there's a very strong environmental agenda to landscape architecture. We actually design for people. We don't design just for nature. And we are at the confluence between nature and people, right? Nature, people, and place, right? And people have to be part and parcel of that idea. So to do that, we do a lot of times we have to go out and meet people, but we also have lecture modules that look at this, right? So one of them being Intro to Landscape Architecture, in which we, in the first semester, explain to you what landscape architecture is, what kind of a background it has, what are the projects that are involved in it. And then in history and theory, we look at how far back do we go when we talk about landscape architecture. To be quite honest, it goes back as far as the founding of civilization, of human civilization, right? When we first started to alter the landscape in order to create our first cities, right? So it has a very long history other than just the design of parks and gardens that you know of today. Like I mentioned, the design studios are a big part of the education here at NUS, and the first thing that you will have when you're coming in is the first 2 semesters, in which we will ground you in just understanding how to look and read at the landscape, right? Most people can understand that, I stay under a tree, it's very comfortable, but we want to let you see beyond that, right? We want to let you see with the lens of a landscape architect, and that requires a little bit of time for you to fully understand it. So a lot of the time we require you, or we highly recommend you to work with your hands, work with your eyes, go out and explore, and then build little models. For example, the image on the bottom left, it's not just about the area above it, but also what happens underground with the roots. In the second year, we look at how do you then start modifying existing sites, so retrofitting sites to make them better one way or another, or how we can transform infrastructure, like I mentioned, canals, roads, hard infrastructure, such that they can be greened up to have more services, more ecosystem services. Have them a little bit more sensitive to nature and natural processes. In year 3, we look at digitizing landscapes. That's something that you see, for example, on the top left. We introduce digital tools to our students to let them think in 3 dimensions. So one of the big problems that we have is that landscapes tend to be designed in 2 dimensions, but the cities are not in any way in 2 dimensions, right? They are in 3 dimensions, especially in Singapore, where we see landscapes being stacked on top of buildings, for example, in skyrise greening. On top of that, we have a much stronger emphasis also on designing, again, for people. We will ask students to go out into various areas in Singapore, speak to the residents who are there, and try to understand what is it they require in order to better their living environment using landscape architecture itself. Now, in the 4th year, this is something that we are doing, is we are allowing you to do specializations. So in this case, there are 2 specialization tracks that you can choose from. You can do both, so 1 semester each, or you can focus purely on one. One of these tracks is the ecological design track. So this is something like you see on the left, in which we look much deeper into ecological processes, natural processes. We look at plant materials, species selection, layering of vegetation, in order for you to be a lot more sensitive to working with vegetation material as well as natural processes. The other specialization is in landscape technology. So we look at using digital tools, simulation tools, visualization tools, in order to generate landscape projects that were once not thought possible, like in the example on the center bottom. Now, as we go up in levels, especially from year 1 to year 4, you will notice also that the scale completely changes. We go larger and larger because we assume that our students will be able to tackle larger and larger projects with more and more complex situations. So the image on the top center, for example, are some of our past students who looked at a river in Jakarta that tends to flood. So we are trying to tackle even flooding issues in a third world country, not in Singapore, that is using landscape architecture, right? So that's kind of the progression that we're having as the years go by. So let's look at some of the admission requirements. Before I go into the technical requirements, I think it's much more useful and important for you to understand if you do have an aptitude for studying landscape architecture. Now, what we are looking for in our students is really curiosity. So we want students who are curious about the natural environment, the built environment. We want them to question things that we teach them and things that they read. And we want them to have very keen observational skills in order to spark this curiosity. You will notice that also we are very visual in nature, but also very verbal. So you have to be kind of able to communicate visually and verbally as well, and that's something that you should be comfortable in. And of course, like I mentioned, you have to have an interest in the outdoors, in nature, in environmental issues, and you have to be completely comfortable with some of these. We are not like OBS, where we send you outdoors to go camping. No, nothing like that. But you have to have an innate interest in the outdoors and in environmental issues as well. We do request that you produce a portfolio. For A-level students, this is not compulsory, but we highly recommend it. And the reason why we recommend it is we just want to see that you have some kind of a design bone inside you, right? It doesn't have to be design work. It can be sketches. We have had students who had produced things like they did a design for their ECA, right? Their CCA. They did like a t-shirt design. They did paintings on the side when they're free. They go for hikes. They do photography at the side, etc., etc. Right? It doesn't have to be landscape architectural design projects. We don't expect you to even come with that unless you're coming from a diploma course. right? It's just to demonstrate that you do have that interest and an inclination towards art and design. Okay. Now, the admission requirements are as such. I won't go through them in detail. You can refer to a more detailed requirements on the website link at the bottom there. But in general, we're looking at a kind of a pass in, I believe it's mathematics, physics, chemistry, or mathematics, chemistry, physics, or maths, right? But again, just go onto the website and figure it out yourself. The indicative grade profile supposedly is on the top 90th percentile, but because there is a interview, we do prefer students that are more interested in the program itself than those who just excel in academics but are not interested at all. So what are the future opportunities should you come and join us, after graduation? Some people ask us, especially because now we're part of CDA, whether or not the BLA program is a licensed program. There is no professional licensing for landscape architects in Singapore. There is only accreditation, like I mentioned. And when you join the BLA program, you are applicable to be accredited as a landscape architect through SILA. Of course, this requires a number of years of practice and of course sitting for the accreditation exam. You can again refer to the accreditation page listed on the website as well for more information. If you're interested in furthering your studies while you're here in NUS, there are several ways you can do it. You can go via a student exchange program. We have just opened them up this semester at the time of recording. And I assume once COVID starts to die down, we will open our doors fully and more students can travel to all the countries that we have links to. Within NUS itself, you can do a minor. We have a few select students who actually did a second major. And you can see the list of minors that are available to you. The only catch is that it is up to you as a student to kind of plan your time correctly. We do warn you that the workload is a little bit on the high side for the BLA program and any other design course for that matter. So do take note of this before you do sign up for a minor or a major. So upon graduation, like I mentioned, you can do an MLA, a Master's in Landscape Architecture, or you could do any of the other masters here at NUS. For example, if you're interested in the larger scale urban planning or landscape planning ideas, you can do a Master's in Urban Planning instead of a Master's of Landscape. Do note that it is of course based on application and you might not be able to obtain the first year of the Master's waived off because you did not come from the urban planning background. But again, these are open to you. What are job prospects upon graduation? This is something, this graph here is actually not from our BLA graduates because our BLA program is extremely new. It's only in our third year. So we haven't had even a first graduate yet. But our MLA program, the Master's program, has been around for more than 10 years. And this is a very quick picture as to where they have landed up. The majority of them, if not almost all of them, have stayed within the discipline or the profession. Half of them have ended up in private firms, so basically landscape architectural firms, or architectural firms that have a kind of landscape arm like DP Green, right? So most of them had ended up there. Another quarter ended up in Singapore's various agencies, the top three of which are National Parks Board for obvious reasons, HDB because they do have landscape architects who are working on the planting in HDB areas, as well as URA when we're looking at the planning side of things. Another quarter, like myself, ended up in academia, so in NUS itself, RMIT, and abroad. Right, so most of us have found jobs, but still within this this greening industry, right, or more specifically landscape industry. Now, is there a demand for landscape architects? There is definitely a demand. If not, we would not have gone into the trouble of creating an MLA program and subsequently creating a bachelor's program as well. So there is a demand for landscape architects because of the growing environmental concerns that the world is having. And we realize that it is not the engineers that can solve this alone. It is not the planners that can solve this alone. It's some kind of a mishmash between all of these. And that's really where the landscape architects come in. We are at that middle ground whereby we learn a little bit from the engineers, from the environmentalists, from the planners, and we put them together into something that can be built, something that can be realized in real world in order to solve these problems. And therefore, the profession is definitely in demand. Education Minister Chan Chun Sing recently had this talk whereby he highlighted 3 areas of growing demand, one of them being in the green economies, right? Of course, he didn't mention landscape architecture itself being one of them, but with a degree in landscape architecture, with the background of CDA and its kind of availability of kind of designing your own degree, you are definitely able to enter the green economy or the greening industries one way or another, right? And again, it's a growing industry. You will be hard pressed to not notice this as you read in the papers in this couple of years, especially. So there are multiple roles that are available for you, not just a landscape architect. Some frequently asked questions that we have from our students. Let me go through them. Is drawing or painting a skill that you need to enter landscape architecture? No. That is a kind of like a definite no. We do encourage our students as much as possible to use their hands in drawing, in creating models, but this is not a requirement. In fact, most of our students come in without any formal art background other than what they did in primary school or preschool, right? Most of our students in the senior years will gravitate towards using a computer anyways. So the medium of drawing is not so much a skill that you need, it's just a recommended tool that you use to understand the landscape. So like, for example, the students that you see there, instead of trying to go into the computer, it's just much faster to lay a piece of tracing paper over a map and start drawing ideas onto the map instead. What is the difference between the BLA and the BA architecture program? So what's the difference between landscape architecture and architecture? One of the first things that we mentioned is that the scale is different. So architects definitely work at the scale of a building or at most an estate. Landscape architects have the potential to go much bigger than that. So we can look potentially at an entire city, an entire country, because the landscape essentially is kind of endless if you don't draw political boundaries around it. One of the other main aspects is that architecture tends to focus on indoor related matters like thermal comfort, indoor circulation, indoor lighting requirements, etc. We focus primarily on the outdoors. That's not to say we don't include structure when we need to, but we primarily look at the outdoor environment whereby there is no roof above our head. We are open to the sky and the natural elements. As a result of that, we tend to gravitate more towards the natural side of things as opposed to the architects who look at the more urban side of things. But that's not to say there is no confluence or kind of overlap between the two. In fact, in Singapore, it's very hard to draw the line anymore when we start having so much plant material on our buildings itself. Is there any financial assistance available? Yes, there are several scholarships available. Of course, these are on a competitive basis as well as you have to go and apply for them. But please feel free to go and look at some of these websites in order to know more. The MLA program, if you are interested, we are also trying to get a scholarship so that our students can proceed directly from BLA to MLA without paying kind of the full fees for it. So I would like to invite you to find out more. If you are watching this before the 4th of March, please join us in our live studio this Friday, 4th of March, 9:30 to 11 a.m. So we'll be streaming this live from Year 3 Design Studio so that you can understand what is it like to be in a design studio and what can you expect from a design studio, right? So it's a snippet of it so that you can kind of understand it. If you are, again, watching this before the 5th of March, you can join us for a face-to-face open house. This will be on the 5th of March on Saturday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. The only catch is that because of COVID and social distance measures, you have to sign up with one of the 8 sessions. So please go into the QR code and then sign up for one of the 8 sessions. At the time of recording, the PM sessions are still available. And lastly, you can find us on Facebook, on Instagram. You can look for more information on our website as well. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions. It can be anything, you want to know more about the program, you want to know what the entry requirements, or even you want to just speak to somebody to understand if this is the course that's correct for you. Okay, so I thank you for your time, and I hope to see you here at CDA at the BLA program.